Of course, the next level would be that of an organization as a whole or an institution. Increasingly, we do a lot of work in all kinds of networks, particularly those that cross organizations. A lot of our projects today are on value chains, because I really believe we'll be finding social and environmental issues becoming more and more part of business, because people have to manage their value chains in a way that you really look at the whole of it. If you're in the food business, the health of that farming community is your business. You didn't think about that traditionally because you bought food from a supplier. But that supplier bought food from somebody, who bought food from somebody, or bought fish from somebody. So if you're not thinking about the whole of that system, you don't have a system that's going to be viable in all likelihood. And that's true in all the food industry. I think there's a big wake-up in the food industry today. And the last level, you might say, would be beyond individual or obvious connections of institutions, individual institutions, or obvious connection, which is really, you might say, more the contextual industry, societies, the regional groupings, where you have many different industries and types of organizations. When you look at, for example, food systems, eventually you get to the health and well-being of a farming community or a fishing community. Well, that's a regional perspective that then pulls in all the industries, all the businesses, the schools, the families, the whole, everything is there. I'd say everything in our society is there in microcosm in any geographic locale. So that's the hardest one to get your arms around. But the truth is, they're all a progression, but it really helps to understand the progression.
So that sounds to me like a term that I sometimes use is inspired pragmatism.
Yes.
You bring together the deep inspiration that is at the core of really human being, spiritual in that sense, and you bring it into real living. And what I observe when I look into all the different sectors of society, even though there's so many problems and so many challenges, you can see really that around the world, every single sector is transforming, and to me it appears transforming along similar lines with similar values, and that really there is a new civilization, if you want, emerging, and it's hard to see it because the media is very oriented on specific stories, and most people actually look
negative
stories, and most people look into their sector. So there are few generalists left in a certain sense. And yet you are agreeing. So say something more about what you think is true about this overarching phenomena and how it is kind of evolving, like the developmental movement that is really taking over the whole of society.
I believe the awareness of being in a time of crisis is growing. I think very few people don't have some version of that. Then obviously it's a question of how do you perceive it, and then how do you see the possibilities for appropriate response. So there's a lot of variety there. I mean, look at one appropriate response to a crisis is defend yourself. So we see that all around the world, particularly true in this country. There's a very defensive attitude in the United States today. We're trying to keep from losing all the things that we've got, particularly our material affluence. But there's other responses as well. So I think around the world, you see this, I would say, explosion of extraordinary stories of the transformation of key systems that shape how we live. I mentioned the food system a minute ago. We've been involved now for almost 8 years in what is the largest systems change effort I've ever been part of. It's basically now about 60 or 70 of the largest food companies and NGOs in the world working together on how to bring what they say, how to bring sustainable agriculture into the mainstream. not just a few little pockets of organic farms that you buy on Saturday morning from a local farmer. But imagine that's, healthy, sustainable agriculture was the mainstream system in terms of the quality of the food, but also the impact, the social and environmental impact, because farming or fishing all depend on the well-being of the ecosystems. Our harmony with Mother Nature is what gives us food, in a nutshell. And you destroy that harmony, you don't have food sooner or later. You don't have food you can really eat. So I believe that's the first industry that's really starting to wake up. Because I think there's enough people and enough organizations that are starting to see that if we keep heading in the direction we're going, we are really going off a cliff. We have lost half the topsoil in the world in the industrial age, and the global food system is, I think, the largest generator of poverty in the world. In order for you and I to have cheap melons in the middle of winter in a northern climate where it's basically pretty cold, you have to hook up everybody's agricultural markets into huge commodity markets. And in big commodity markets, you drive prices down relentlessly and production up so you can reach more and more markets at a cheaper price. Unfortunately, those falling prices are falling incomes for farmers. 50 to 70 million a year migrate into slums and shantytowns because they no longer have a viable rural economy. Now, all that's being exacerbated by climate change, changes in weather patterns, all that. But there's a set of dynamics there that even go beyond climate change. There is a globalization of food. So tomorrow we have MIT's 150th anniversary celebration. They asked me to organize the closing session. And they wanted a bunch of CEOs. I said, don't waste your time. It's going to be so boring. We've heard way too many CEO talks in our lifetimes, all of us. And I said, let me think about it a little. So tomorrow we're going to close MIT's 150th anniversary by two people will join me for a conversation. Barbara Stocking, who's the CEO of Oxfam, and Paul Pullman, who's the CEO of Unilever. Those two organizations have been working together now for almost 15 years. They helped us organize the Sustainable Food Lab. Oxfam reached out to the NGO world, Unilever reached out to the food industry, and they both said the same thing. These problems are bad, and they're getting much worse. None of us can solve this problem by ourselves. We all are going to have to work together. The NGOs have knowledge about environment and social conditions and cultural realities that we in business don't have. On the other hand, the NGOs can say the businesses know something about commerce and innovation, because we're not going to solve these problems except through profound innovation at many, many levels. So today, Oxfam and Unilever have a board-to-board strategic partnership to collaborate to bring 500,000 smallholders into Unilever's global food chains. That's a huge stretch. All around the world, you see stories like that. So that's the food industry. Very few people in the West, certainly not in America, like nobody in America, knows that actually the Chinese Party, the Communist Party, has now committed to a massive pace of decarbonizing the Chinese economy. So there's these stories all around. We work a lot in schools. I actually believe the industrial age school is finally dying and something new is being born. But in all these cases, you have the same phenomenon. You have an example here, an example here, an example here. For every one Unilever, believe me, there's 20 competitors who kind of all say the right words, but they don't have the depth of commitment. They don't see it as a truly strategic matter. If we don't embrace these set of questions, we don't have a future. And if we do, we could lead in innovating and create a future that we really like to live in. And don't get me wrong, whenever you get close to any one of those examples, of course, there are always shortcomings. These are living systems. They're not perfect. Unilever's not a paragon. It just happens to be a company that really sees this global food system as a strategic matter for innovation. So I think there are so many examples, almost none of which are visible to most people. So the first is, of course, to make them visible. The second is to really commit ourselves to interconnecting them and helping them see each other and find each other. Who knows how close we are to a critical mass? You can only tell that in hindsight. 50 years from now, you'll be able to look back and say, oh, well, that happened in 2005, and that happened in 2008, and 2011, and 2015, these things happened. And before you knew it, you had a worldwide revolution occurring in education or in how businesses manage value chains. So all I know is there's so many inspiring stories around. And of course, they're all grounded. They're all in very practical context. So your phrase, inspired pragmatism, would characterize any of these people.
On our website, globalleadership.tv, you will find additional footage, other dialogues with innovation leaders from around the world, and also the hands-on practices that help them and their organizations to move from inspiration to real change.